a lot of people will ask me when I do my public appearances, they'll say, what should a CTO be doing? And what they're really saying is, hey, I just became CTO, or I want to be CTO and I need to know the responsibilities. And they're going to be vastly different at every different company in every different industry at every different size. The thing that has made me sad recently is people who are really advanced at technology, who understand this stuff, that are, my peers, because my background is engineering directly, their inability to see the tidal wave that is coming.
Welcome to our brand new mini-series. This is Cut the Onion. It is where we peel back the layers of what it really means to be a chief technology officer. We, across this mini-series, are going to be getting to the core of tech roles that can oftentimes be misunderstood, and we're going to be exploring the stories of those working in tech across a multitude of different industries. We want to bring people some honest takes, trends, and tips for moving forward, and peel away a lot of those common misconceptions and myths that come when people think of a CTO. And I thought, who better to talk to about this than the modern CTO himself, Joel Beasley. So, Joel, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for giving me your time. I know the Modern CTO podcast has been around for a couple of years. I am not a CTO. I am not in that tech world, but I listen in, and my brother, who is a CTO, listens in. So your podcast has this gorgeous ability to bring in all audiences, and I thought you would be a great person to speak to here because of that honesty, that really lovely way of communicating. And when we came up with this idea for this mini-series, you were one of the first people I thought of, and I'm so glad that we're here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. I wanted to kick things off with just you talking us through a typical day in your life as somebody who brings a place for CTOs to hang out.
Yeah, so I run the Modern CTO podcast, which is the largest tech leadership podcast. We focus on bringing value to technical leaders at different stages in their career, whether they're just moving from developer to first-time CTO, or they're trying to go to VPs of engineering, or they want to jump to CTO of maybe a publicly traded company. So we make content across those categories. We'll have everyone on from the CTO of Verizon to somebody in their startup basement with just a good idea. So we have a lot of diversity in as far as where people are at in their career stages. And that's the point of the show. It's been going for about 10 years and 1,000 episodes. And yeah, very excited that I get to do it. My life running that show is mostly me working with Josh, our producer, coming up with editorial calendars, content. I do these meetings with CTOs where we do these 15-minute meetings where I'll see like what's going on in their space, and I'll do anywhere from 1 to 10 of them a week. And that gives me a good idea of like how to make content and do that better. Previously, I built and sold 3 software companies as the CTO co-founder, so from scratch to exit. And so that's where I got my experience. And then I started writing and blogging, and then that turned into the podcast. And then 2 years into the podcast, we started getting sponsors. And that's when we kind of became a media company, right? And now we make our show, but we also make about 20 other shows for Fortune 1000 companies like NetApp, Beyond Trust, things like that.
Wow. And I loved the origin story for you. So it all started while you were writing the book, Modern CTO. So could you tell us a bit about why you wrote it?
Yeah. So kind of a big moment in my life. So I had done these projects, and I had always thought about writing this book. I wrote the first version of it, like the first cover, the first 10 pages of it, when I was 23, and then I just kind of left it. And the reason why I left it was because I didn't have enough experience to actually say anything. Like I got all my knowledge out in like 10 pages, and I was like, all right, I guess I don't have enough experience to write a full book. This is like a blog post. So I just put it away. And then coming up on 30, my mom had passed away, and like unexpectedly, suddenly. And so going through that process with my siblings, I realized that, okay, I really, if I'm gonna do this, I just have to commit to it and do it. So I started writing this book in the mornings before my project work throughout the day. And the idea was pretty simple. It was to help share what I had learned building engineering teams with people who haven't done it before, or people who are actively doing it and experiencing the problems, in hopes that it would be useful to some people. And so the blog did well, turned it into a book. And then before I published the book, my wife, she said, hey, why don't you send copies out to other CTOs and talk with them about it? And I said, that's a good idea. So we did. Those conversations were really fun. And then she goes, why don't you just record the conversations and release it as a podcast? And this was about 10 years ago. And I was like, well, because everybody has a podcast, this is whatever. And I found a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk who laid out how to do it. Mm-hmm. And he said something very interesting to me. He said 99% of the people won't do it because they don't have the discipline to do it. But this is the process, and here it is for free. And so I said, well, I've got discipline. I could do that. And, you know, I did it.
You did it. And 10 pages to 1,000 episodes is
Yep.
0 to 100. So we have a lot to thank to your wife, I guess, for all of those amazing episodes that came to fruition as well, that idea. And I remember hearing the story of you booking your first big interview, that moment of being, was it Microsoft?
I think it was Kevin at Microsoft. It was either Kevin or Cody. They booked in within like the same week, and then Kyle. So it kind of took off fast, I guess. And there was this like 1, 2, or 3 week period where we just booked a bunch of really big guests. And that was very exciting. But yeah, I did a little dance. I think I've shared that story before. I was just trying not to sound like overly excited on the phone, but I was very excited to get to interview Kevin, and he was a fantastic person. We helped him launch his show, which is called, I think, Behind the Tech. But yeah.
That's my experience today now, interviewing you for this mini-series. So it's nice to see that moment come around. What I love is that you've, as you said, you've had 1,000 episodes. You've spoken to 1,000 CTOs. Mm-hmm. You talk about, 10 years ago up until now, what have been some of the biggest changes that you've seen to the CTO role in that time?
Well, one thing that was interesting when I started doing the show was that I would pick up on this recurring story where people would say, I don't have a traditional background. I got involved with computers really, and then they tell this story, and it's the most common thing that I've ever heard, because I've done all of these interviews, right? Now, I don't think that there's been a person that has interviewed publicly, at least, I mean, maybe privately, but like publicly interviewed this many technical leaders to pick up on these patterns, but I did. And so seeing that everybody thought their situation was unique, but it was almost identical, was actually pretty fascinating for me. It was also interesting seeing, I think now there's more awareness, and I'll be more specific. So there's such high quality resources. There's so many high quality podcasts. There's also many other great CTO podcasts. Media has become much larger part of our lives. I don't know about you, but I wasn't scrolling through a feed the same way I am today 10 years ago, right? So we're getting higher quality information faster, and I think that's allowing people to get better as leaders quicker.
That's a really good point. I think it's like this space that we're all in where we're getting to see so many different perspectives, so many different stories, so many different life lessons, and you're kind of plucking and learning from all of these different spaces all of the time.
Yeah, and people are doing interviews more than ever now. Especially, we noticed a huge uptick after post-COVID. Everybody upgraded their equipment in COVID, which made remote interviews even better.
100%. I know that whole, because I find it funny when you're like, 10 years ago, you're like, well, everybody has a podcast.
Yeah, I know. And actually what happened was I went around and started asking people. I was like, hey, do you listen to podcasts? And I got that a lot that they did. And then I'd ask what their favorite podcast was. And this is everybody from a random person I meet at the mall to dinner or whatever it may be. And one thing that I said is, I heard this story consistently that said, oh, I loved this podcast. It was my favorite. It got popular. Then they started doing ads and I stopped listening. And so I made an early decision not to do ads. So when we do sponsored content with brands like, let's say, Amazon or SAP or someone like that, we don't run it as ads on the show. We just go out to AWS and like record content at their event and then do an interview with somebody and publish it.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. I want to just cut into the onion a little bit now. And at this point, it's when our eyes get a bit teary and we shed a few tears. So I want to ask you, what is making you cry in the tech world? Any big problem that you see that needs to be solved?
I'll answer the what makes me cry. I guess if we're going to do that, let's do it.
Let's do it.
The thing that has made me sad recently is people who are really advanced at technology, who understand this stuff, that are, my peers, because my background is engineering directly. Their inability to see the tidal wave that is coming. And that's made me a little bit sad. It's made me sad because I'm standing on an island and I see a tsunami coming. I can't tell if it's 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years away, but I know it's coming. I know it's going to make life entirely different for whatever it is. But there's people that see that tsunami and they're like, that's not really a tsunami. That's just like some clouds in the distance or whatever it is. And it's like, it's coming, man. And I'm specifically referring to the AGI conversation because it's getting so much better exponentially and it's just going to happen. And so, so many people cling to their humanity in some weird sense, and they're like, it's not going to happen, or it's never going to replace humans, it's not as creative as humans. Then Ethan Mullock releases a report showing AGI or the current large language models, when blind tested, humans vote that they're more creative than humans. And yeah, because it's blind, they don't know, they just present ideas. And so it's like, we already agree as humans that LLMs are more creative than humans in certain situations. That's just because it's not here today doesn't mean it's not going to be here tomorrow. And that's actually, like, that blindness to me was a big surprise, because I've been going around talking to these people for a decade and I thought that they would be able to see it. But I realized that perception and being able to understand the future is a very different skill set than leadership, engineering, software teams, any of that.
Yeah. That makes me think of the paper on the psychology of design, and it says that most people, when you try to get them to understand the future, they just see a version of the world today. So it's not within our brains to be able to imagine what could be so different, that tidal wave, as you say, that tsunami, what that could be and how to imagine it.
And I think that's a feature of humans. I can't run a 2-minute mile, right? Or whatever the fastest mile is. Like, I haven't honed that muscle, but I feel like I'm very bad at most things. And I think one thing I am good at is understanding, reminding myself that I don't understand exponential progression, and then giving myself anchors to help better understand what's going to happen in the future.
I love that. And what do you think is causing that blindness? Is it the fear of having to learn new things, or is it just not seeing it at all and not knowing what to expect?
It's the same reason why we don't talk about that we're going to die all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. My wife hates it. I remind her regularly, probably 5 times a week. Like, we'll be sitting there with our 3 kids and I'm like, oh man, this is so, enjoy this. Like, before we die, this is the thing we're going to be thinking back to. And she's like, shut up. And I'm like, all right, valid point. I'll be quiet.
5 times a week just seems a bit excessive.
I don't know. My brain is just like, it reminds me regularly. I don't know why, but I mean, because time is precious and we only have so much time on this planet. Yeah.
It is true. It is true. And I've heard of people doing things like celebrating and planning funerals, and making it a celebration.
Dark.
Yeah.
Well,
to get you to talk about it.
Yeah, I've seen people do that. I've seen people do the watch thing, like get a death watch, which essentially is like counting down their estimated lifespan. But that's a little too much for me. The closest I've ever gotten is the poster that's like how many weeks you have like in a lifetime. And that to me, it wasn't like, it was the right blend of like reality of situation but optimism. I think you can definitely lean way too hard on nihilism, because that's what happens if you start to get nihilistic and then life becomes low quality, and so you don't want to get there. But it's a hard balance. You have to remember that it's not forever, and you also have to be able to get up and motivate yourself to make a better world every day, right?
Yeah. And choose your time wisely as well.
Yeah.
And yeah. I love how quickly we got to death there.
Yeah.
To level things out, let's talk about tears of joy.
Okay.
What are the exciting and brilliant things that are happening in the world of technology, emerging trends that you've heard from maybe from your guests or that you're watching now that's really making an impact on the world of tomorrow?
Okay, great. So I've got a lot of things here. I would be silly not to mention my two favorite subjects, which are humanoid robots. Hashtag my wife not having to do laundry anymore. Right? We're very much looking forward to this day. Both of us are. And small modular or nuclear reactors that are going to help power data centers and help us generate power on demand wherever we want it. Those two things are really top of mind for me. And from there, like product-specific stuff in the tech leader space, I'd have to say Render's doing something pretty cool. They're essentially the modern Heroku. So when I was a developer and Heroku came out, it made my life so much easier, and it was so cool, and it made all these leaps and bounds. And I'm not sure, are you familiar with Heroku?
Nope. I was just going to
say, it's like
say,
a hosting yeah, it like helps you deploy your applications.
Okay.
And then they got bought by Salesforce. And then the product got better, and then it kind of like stopped, as almost if it didn't become a priority for Salesforce anymore. The innovation seemed to stop, but then this new company, Render, came out and kind of stepped on the gas, so that was cool. I've seen interesting stuff in predictive analytics, AI-powered digital analyst. Basically, you shove all your data into it, and it can uncover insights. That's Quantum Metric is doing something cool with that. And then I'd probably say Speakeasy AI. They're making Speakeasy API. They're making APIs more accessible. So, nothing's worse in a software developer's world than like a poorly documented API that's not well maintained. And I got to meet with their CEO. Josh, was it their CEO? I think it was. I got to meet with one of their executives. Yeah, and they walked me through what they were doing, and it was pretty fascinating. So on the hard skills, like on the small micro level, you've got the hosting people, the analytics people doing interesting things with AI, and then the people making APIs better. I think that impacts a large group of people. Those are big areas. And then on the humanity level, so I would say that's in the big areas in tech that I see interesting things happening. Oh, and I have to mention Venice.ai. Big fan, founded by this guy named Eric Voorhees, but they host all the LLM models without the nonsense.
Oh.
So they like strip out the ideology of the models and then just have it do what you want it to do. And they host it, and it's free, and you can go to it. It's like a chat GPT type interface, and it's Venice.ai. And I'm very excited for their API to come about. Hopefully they're going to use Speakeasy, right? But I'm excited for their API to come about because we have a couple internal applications here at our production company that use large language models, and I would love to not have to fight Claude on what it thinks is right,
I've heard you speak about this, just with AI itself. The one thing that you were talking about was the culture, the cultural aspects of AI, and you mentioned ChatGPT there, but maybe the governance of it and how it may not know different cultures and how you can't really segment the bias that it may have in certain spaces. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, well, congratulations. This is like you're the most well-prepared interviewer I think I've ever done. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So what happens is the Western civilizations, which are not the only civilizations, they are the ones that are primarily dominating this commercialized space, right? And what's happening is you see these individual private companies, they are embedding their ideology into the models on what they think is right, what they think is wrong. Everyone, not just the LLMs, but if you look at the companies that are doing even the video generations and basically the whole generative AI category, right? And they have their own ways and methodologies for handling this. Here's the problem. It's not disclosed. So this is what I'm saying. I'm saying I want to treat it like a nutrition label. I want to treat it like a nutrition label where I know what I'm eating. I know what I'm consuming versus that's not the case right now. Right now is just like, here's a package of Cheetos with no nutrition label. It's like you have no idea what you're actually eating. And I don't love government. I'm a big fan of like incredibly small government. And I think this is a good opportunity for government to be useful, not restrict the models, not try to put a government federal ideology on the models, just force a transparency to the models. So you just have to know what you're consuming. So it should say, hey, Claude believes A, B, C, and D, and it's designed to give you, not give you answers for this and give you answers for this because of this reason. That would be great to know because there are many situations where I might want to use Claude. There are many situations where I might want to use Llama. There's different situations where I want to use different things. But not knowing what those ideologies are, then you integrate them in your application. Then, like, I just ran into an issue last week with Claude. I was like, hey, take this email and, like, write it to be more convincing. Or I can't remember the exact example. But it's like, I don't think that's ethical. I'm like, act like a copywriter and make something that converts better so that people like click the email, subject line or whatever, make the subject line better and then make the preview text better. And it's just like, this is an unethical task because you're trying to bait people into your email. I'm like, this is called copywriting.
Whoa.
Yeah, I took screenshots of it and sent it around to my friends and stuff too.
That's wild.
Yeah, I texted Eric Voorhees and I was like, dude, get your API for Venice up like fast so I can switch away from this nonsense.
Please.
Yeah.
It's such a great way that you describe it though, that the labels, because that just speaks to everybody. And I think that knowledge and having that visual in your mind when you are in the future, we all will be interacting with these tools.
Right.
And it's ensuring the safety of people to be able to say, no, I'm not going to eat anything, especially nowadays. I'm not going to eat anything that doesn't have any nutritional descriptions on it.
Right.
So
but
why
it also helps you
Yeah.
when you want high protein food, you have accurate nutrition labels. So for example, if I was building an application in an Arabic country, like I don't know their local culture and values, like if I'm tasked with building something like that. But if I could go to an LLM that had those embedded in them, that's actually a feature, right? It's a benefit. But right now we have no transparency, and it's and then they're all arguing questions like, should we let AI happen or not? I'm like, let's just stop the bleeding right now with transparency.
Yeah, and it's already happened there. So
It's already happened.
Yeah. You mentioned humanity. So the things that you're most excited for, the tears of joy and the humanity space.
Yeah, the humanoid robots
the
humanoid robots and the small modular reactors. Those are gonna, right now we have a bottleneck inside of our supply chain, and I would say it's a global situation, not just a North America situation. And that bottleneck is the ability to stand up data centers as quickly as the demand exists for them. So we're working on that as a people. And one of the things that's going to help with that, there's two bottlenecks to standing up data centers faster. The first one is the talent, and not in a soft skill sense, the talent in the plumbers, the electricians, all of that, because usually you want to put a data center where land is cheap. Usually there's not a lot of people where land is cheap, so you have to bring in higher skilled people from larger cities. So a lot of the data center companies are working on that problem. That's problem one, just the actual people. Problem two is the energy sources. So you have to plug into a grid. The government, the local government has to be able to supply the energy necessary to run the data center and make upgrades to their energy infrastructure. So the small modular reactors resolve that. And you could see, I've been following this for about 15 years, these small reactors. And in the past year, you've seen Microsoft, Oracle, several multi-billion-dollar companies either buy nuclear startups or hire nuclear scientists to help solve this problem. So there's a number of great people and companies that are actively working to solve this. My personal favorite currently is nanonuclear technology out of New York.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I heard James Walker is their CEO, and I was watching Jordan Peterson. I'm a big fan of Jordan. And he had James on the show because James is also Canadian, and they were talking about what Nano was doing with the reactors and their business model and how they were going about it. I found that interesting. I talked to Josh. We contacted James. We just did the interview with James last week. It hasn't aired yet, I don't believe. But yeah, and he was fantastic. Afterwards, I bought a bunch of stock. Because they're a publicly traded company. I was like, I want to invest in this company. Yeah. I was like, they're going to be big. They're going to be big. So that's pretty exciting. That's about them. They're building, I think it's called Zeus and Odin. They're building 2 different types of reactor systems, and you can learn more about it. I think it's just nanotechnology.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting. Very interesting. Thank you for that. I want to go now to looking at misconceptions. You have spoken, as I said, to hundreds, if not 1,000 around the globe. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about the CTO role that you have come across?
Yeah, so it's very rarely about technology. It's almost always, and I was surprised, many of the people I've interviewed are surprised, because the most common path, I would say, if you're going to generalize, the most common path is someone who is building software or hardware systems, and then they had some success, and then they built a team, and then they built a larger team, and then became a company, and then they found themselves in this leadership position when their core hard skill was like independent engineering, right? And so to find out that like that's what your life becomes at the top is pretty interesting. And so the fact that it's rarely about the tech and it's mostly about communication and people, that's just an interesting thing to realize. And then you have to make your choice. You have to say, do I want to get good at this new thing that's not what I started at? Or do I want to go back and find a way to spend 80% of my time doing the old thing? And you know, that's a hard choice to make. But I find that people make it unconsciously, and when they're making it unconsciously, they're usually not doing the thing that needs to be done, right? So I often will find people that are like, man, I hate, if they say something like this off the record, they're like, I just deal with people stuff all day and communication. Like, I just want to get back to the code, and that's just what I want to do. It's like, okay, just do that. Just like hire the correct people to do it. But yeah, rarely about the tech, mostly communication and people skills, and understanding how teams work together and what types of people work together and getting the outcome achieved. That's most of the day-to-day of the CTO.
So I want to talk about how you found your community of developers and those developers that then went to CTOs. And in your book, you mention visionary CTOs. Can you tell us a bit more about the visionary CTOs? Would you consider yourself a visionary CTO now? And what are the other types of CTOs out there?
Yeah, so I don't really know how I did it. One day at a time. I don't know, but it happened. So I don't really. I just, from what I said at the beginning, I just really cared about this problem set, and my curiosity, led the way, and then it kind of happened. But as far as visionary CTO, yeah, I'm slow to confidence in most areas of my life, but I have found people repeatedly tell me that I'm good at like seeing what's going to happen. And so that's kind of built up my confidence and better understanding that in like a macro way. But yeah, visionary CTO, there's many types, right? You've got developer CTOs, you've got visionary CTOs, you got Ivy League CTOs. These are people that are just Ivy League business degrees and then they become CTOs. You know, and the way that we categorize, I wouldn't say one's better than the other at all. They're just different types, right? And we categorize most often by their strength. So we're calling them Ivy League CTOs. Well, because they've got a business education strength. We call them visionaries because they can see the future. That's a strength. Developers have way more hands-on keyboard, close to the metal type, you know, experiences. So what I have figured out for myself is that the ones, so like, let's make this useful. Like, so who does the best, right? Because that's what I'll get asked. Okay, which is a better CTO? I get asked this all the time. Is a developer CTO? Do I have visions there? CTO, Ivy League? And so I'd say, look, I think any of them can be great. I've met and I have close personal relationships with people of all different types of CTO backgrounds. But the one common thread, to make it useful for people, between the CTOs that do, let's say, the top 1% of the top 1%, is that they understand which one they are. And they understand what they like to do. And they understand what the market needs, whatever people are exchanging money for, that value. They understand it really, really, really well. They're like, look, even at a multi-billion-dollar company, people are handing us money for communication, or they're handing us money for deliverability, or whatever the one-word thing is that they're getting handed money for. They really deeply understand it. And they understand their own flaws, and they understand their own likes and desires and all of that. So they have high self-awareness. Kyle Malady, he's one of my favorite people in the space. When I met him, he was just about to become CTO of Verizon. Today, he's the CEO of Verizon Business. And he shared with me a tool that he uses to make sure he's on track. And what he does is I think he does a quarterly review with himself. And he makes a pie chart of how he wants to spend his time and a pie chart of how he is spending his time. And he notices the difference, and he hires, fires, you know, grows, does what he needs to do to get those things back in sync.
Wow. I love that so
Very
much.
simple. He says it's like a 5-minute exercise. He's like, this is how I want to be spending my time, but this is how I am spending my time. Here's the adjustments that need to be made.
That is so beautiful. I think everyone could do with that.
Yeah, everyone can do that.
There's something so special in that. And I'm even thinking now, when you're mentioning that, what do you say to those then who might balk at the question of what type of CTO are you?
Oh, they're just less experienced.
Okay.
Yeah, they just don't have enough self-awareness to know what they are. And that's okay. They're just new, and we should all be really kind to them and help them get, you know, immersed around other CTOs and involved in CTO groups and, you know, all of that good stuff so that they can learn more.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's just advice to them to keep learning, keep looking inward at yourself and finding out what that is. And as you said, that key thing that your business is operating around and where you're bringing that value to.
Yeah, you'll find that the things I tend to care about are fairly uncontroversial. Like, it's really just helping people get what they want. It's like, this is how they want to spend their time. This is how they are. How do we get you to where it's not about me? It's about how do we help them, you know? And that's, you know, what are people handing you money for?
Yes.
Understanding that deeply. A lot of CTOs are like, I just build the tech stack. I just build the infrastructure, make sure all the engineering. That's sales and business guys type thing. And I'm like, well, no, you can't accurately make your engineering decisions without understanding how they're funded, right? Like, what's driving the revenue?
And I've heard you speak about that. How often are you speaking to your customers? That question that you pretty much ask all guests. And I'm presuming that feeds into the type of CTO that you are and become, because how often are you taking that time to listen to the people that you are hopefully serving?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too, right? Because one of the things we get really weird about is titles. And so you can go into titles are for the outside world and for general areas of where they're going to be spending time. But I've seen VPs of engineering acting like CTOs, and I've seen CTOs acting like developers. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, they want that title, and they're bringing that value to the organization, they can have that title. And so, and I don't think that there's anything wrong. And a lot of people will ask me when I do my public appearances, they'll say, what should a CTO be doing? And what they're really saying is, hey, I just became CTO, or I want to be CTO, and I need to know the responsibilities. And they're going to be vastly different at every different company in every different industry at every different size. What your company needs when you're 100 people or one person is different than when you're at 500 people or 1,000. Different industries have different setups, whether you're running maybe technology for an agency or you're running a SaaS product for yourself. It's like the team structures. What I want people to do is step back when they think about titles and better understand that, like, if you're in a leadership position, like if you're in the leadership position, your job is to make sure that the structure of your organization is not copying Amazon's 2 pizza rule. Oh, the structure of your organization, I know.
Every single time.
I know. It's like, or whoever, got ninja teams or whatever the new fad is that somebody wrote about that got a nice Substack appearance, right? The purpose of you is to understand what the organism, the living organism that is your organization, needs in order to be the best version of itself. And when you start thinking like that and you get out of JavaScript, like different specific technologies or different copying other people's strategies, when you get more to like what's right for this organization today, then you get better results.
That needs to go on a t-shirt. Just needs to go right on a t-shirt. What's right for this organization today?
Yeah.
Just keep remembering that.
Yep.
You mentioned there, just going into the next layer, you mentioned there how time is spent. And I've heard you speak about creating business systems for yourself, the 5 systems, how that can free up a bit more time and space, and maybe how that encourages innovation and growth within your own business. So can you tell us a bit about that, where that started, why it started, and what it's doing for you now?
Yeah, so it started out of stress and anxiety for not knowing what was going to be. And through conversations with people smarter than me, I found this quote that is something along the lines of, you fall to the level of your systems. Right? You don't rise, you fall to the level of you will only be as good as your systems are. And I was like, well, okay, that makes sense, because as you start building a business, you put things, they start working and they break, and then you have to reinforce them, and then new people come in, and it's complicated. So I didn't have any official systems. Originally, I had people that would have responsibility sets. And then what I found when I started getting stressed out as the business grew and everything was just that we need better systems. So I looked in the marketplace. There's tons of different methodologies. There's the EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System. There's all these different things. But the one thing they all had in common was there's some function that needs to be performed that has some very measurable result and has somebody in charge of it, and it can be tracked. And so I said, okay, so I broke down the business into just the most handful of systems, that the most basic version that you need for success. And so the way that looks like for us, the way that looks like, not for everybody, the way it looks like for our company today is meetings booked. It's the number of meetings we get booked, proposals sent, dollars closed, then so like responsibility for that. That's like a sales pipeline. And then we've got the sales pipeline. We've got the production pipeline. So episodes promised, episodes delivered, things like that. It's very hard metrics. We do a show and tell on Monday and Thursday where the team shows and tells their dashboards, very simplistic dashboards. Like we try to look at the least amount of numbers possible. And then we have conversations about, so the 2 meetings that we have per week as a company are 30 minutes, and it's Monday and Thursday. And in that, we go over the results, any roadblocks, issues, things like that. And we'll do something fun too socially, like Thursdays are Feel Good Thursday. What are you feeling good about today? So we have a bit of fun. But yeah, those systems that, when I designed them, they weren't designed out of like freeing up time or creating creativity or anything like that. They were designed as an anti-anxiety medication, right? It was like, how do I not stress out about this?
Yeah.
Or how do I minimize the stress, and it's just tracking the most basic fundamental things. And so I can rest outside of working hours. I can spend time and be present with my wife and my kids, because I know that as long as we're waking up every day and executing the basics, things will be good. And that's way easier to say after 10 years
Yes.
than it is in the first 2 or 3 years, because you're kind of like, what do I turn this knob here? Does this work? So you get a little bit of that, but developing the systems comes with time.
I love that. I really appreciate that honesty as well. And I know so many people would relate to that. And sometimes we find that quite difficult to say, and we maybe put bells and whistles on it. Yeah, it's going to create time for creativity. It's innovation. It's all of these things. Whereas you just peel it right back and you're like, no, I just want to make sure that things are okay and that I can not have to worry about these things.
Yeah, and the fastest way to experience this is just start your own company and you have no plan B. You'll get real hungry real fast and you'll figure it out.
There's no other way. The
No,
safety wheels are gone.
No, you shouldn't send kids to college. You pay me $100,000, I'll throw you into like the desert with a couple bottles of water and be like, go make sales. Figure it out. That'll teach them. And you got to manage your finances, and it's tough. It's hard, but yeah, it's amazing. When you start to, run into people that have maybe larger careers than you do, but they've got less experience in actually operating a business, but they know the heck out of their specific trade. And so what's really hard for me to do, and what I constantly remind myself about, is that everybody's their own person. They all have their own story. They all have strengths. Don't be mean to people if they don't have an area that you assume that they have as a strength, and just be as helpful as you possibly can to other people.
Lovely. I love that. I think that kind of touches on the next question that I had, which was, how do you deliver big, important projects safely and successfully?
Yeah. So safely, probably not the right guy to ask. I
just put fire emojis everywhere. This is fine.
There you go. Yeah. Is it on fire or is he happy? I don't know.
He's
but
in
let's
the
go
desert.
with it.
He's in the desert with a few bottles of water. We don't know.
We don't know. So I found out that, mostly during COVID, that my risk tolerance is much higher than the average person. You'll find that amongst entrepreneurs as well. I don't feel like it is, like going about, because I'm just in my body and my world all day. But when I interact with reality at large, I realize that on the scale of risk, my tolerance is like super high. So safety is something that I know I'm not good at. So if I'm going to do something, I'm going to find some ethics or safety or person to come in, and I'm going to pay them. That doesn't mean I'm going to. So like a lot of people hear me say that at first, like the first part they'll hear, and like, oh, so what are all your products? You don't care. It's like, no, it's just, I don't care, but I know it's a requirement entering the marketplace. So I find somebody who is good at that and I empower them to do it.
I love that. Knowing your strengths as well. And you can't be everything all at once as well. And I really like what I'm seeing throughout this whole thing is that you have brilliant self-awareness, and you've taken a lot of time, I think, to reflect on yourself and who you are, where you're best placed and where other people are best placed to come in and help. And there's no real ego to it. It's just getting shit done. I don't know if you can curse on your podcast, but
yeah, we just did.
Bleep, 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 bleep. But I want to go now deeper into you at your core.
Okay. I've
heard you speak about code mentoring and the importance of having mentors. The Irish accent, I don't know if that's going to come across well, but you've talked about having mentors while also mentoring at the same time. Does this still play a role in how you manage your business, how you oversee things, how you work with people?
Yeah, I think of personal growth in the cross sense. So like imagine like a cross, plus sign or a cross. So you've got your mentors are above you, your peers are to your side, and the next generation's below you. And I didn't come up with this. I read it somewhere and it was really sticky because when I first read it, I realized I only had 2 or 3 peer relationships. I was very weighted on the sides. You know, I didn't have anybody above me and I didn't have anybody below me. And you're not going to make as much progress if you only have peer relationships. And so I found that was a very effective way of doing it. And then the next question comes up is like, you know, for myself, when I said, okay, well, I only have peers, how do I get people above and below me? The below answer was my hard skill that I had confidence in was software engineering. And there was a site called Code Mentor, and it allowed me to just pick up a couple students and like help them do one-on-one stuff. A lot of them were coming out of code schools, being taught garbage, and then needing to actually know something before they got a job. so I help. There are great code schools out there, and I bet you they're even better now because I was doing a lot of this like 10 years ago. But there were definitely a lot of not great code schools as well. And so the couple students I had were from the not great code schools. And that's why they were seeking out mentorship through the Code Mentor platform. Mm-hmm. So that's how I found them. So that's how I solved the bottom part. My peer part was okay. And then the mentorship part above, my understanding of mentorship, if you were to ask me 10 years ago, would be like, oh, you're going to go enter into this relationship with this person and you're going to ask them to be your mentor and it's going to be like this thing. And totally not the case at all. And so the way that I think about mentorship now is just find, like, if you're going to need a mentor, it's because you're doing something very difficult that's unclear. Right? Why else would you need a mentor? Like, you need some help because you're trying to do something difficult that's unclear. Now, there's two types of people. The first type of person is they have the idea that they want to go do this difficult thing, and so they're going to try to find a mentor to help them. And they haven't done anything yet. And then there's people who have done something yet, and they're actively like working on a hard problem. So I'll break that down just a little bit more. So in my personal experience, people come up to me regularly and they'll say, hey, can I have a conversation with you about, I want to start a podcast? And I'll say to them, I will have the conversation with you after you've recorded 30 episodes. So go record 30 episodes and then come talk to me and I'll give you 30 minutes of my time. And that came about because I was saying yes to every opportunity at first. And what I realized is that 95% of the people just want to talk about the idea they have. They don't actually want to do it. So what I came up with is my advice to you before you have 30 episodes is to do nothing other than hit record and release. Doesn't matter what your microphone is. Doesn't matter what your video is. Doesn't matter if you're good or not. Just fully commit to bugging, releasing, producing 30 episodes. And then come to me, because then we're going to have something to talk about other than like the fact that you want to do it, right? You're going to have experience. You'll be like, I did this one episode where like somebody failed, and how do you handle that? You're going to have good questions. So this is what I'm getting to with the mentorship thing. So when you have 30 episodes, you're going to have good questions about like how certain things are handled, which I love to help up and coming people, content creators with those questions. When I know the answers, I share with them what I've learned. And those to me are rewarding conversations. And so the way I look at mentors now is, you're not going to go ask them to become a mentor. All you have to do is take a really good question to the right person who's done it before, and they're going to help you. So if I take a really bad question, how do you start a podcast, to Tim Bailu or whatever, who's done a lot of them, he's not going to respond to that, right? It's like, dude, Google it. There's a bunch of content out there, like figure it out.
Yeah.
But if I come to him and I said, hey, dude, I had, Peterson on, had this guy on, had, so and so on. And I noticed that when I have these like top tier people, like this very specific issue happens when I'm engaging with their media team, and I just send that cold email, he's going to respond to it because he's experiencing that and he had to solve it for himself because he's a step ahead of me. So there's no like, will you be my mentor? You just ask smart people the tough questions that show that you're actually putting in the work and they will answer them. I write my favorite authors all the time when I have good questions. And they almost always respond. I put that in my book. I said the most underrated tool is like writing an author. The worst thing you could do is write an author and ask them a question that's answered in the book. You just look like an idiot.
Page 1, chapter 1. I really like that line. What did it mean? I absolutely love that answer. That is just unlocked loads of things in my brain while you were talking. Firstly, that idea of the value of time and those 30 episodes. All of us, we love talking about ideas. You're so right. That idea conversation, and while that's great, it isn't the type of question that goes into a mentorship space. I also had a boss that used to say that, just Google it. It's like a whole thing in our office. We're the first digital ever team in a radio station in Ireland. And we were kind of just figuring it out as we were going. And I was coming to my boss for answers to questions. And the whole thing of our team is just Google it. You can Google it. You can figure it out. And if you get stuck after that, then let's talk. Because it's there. It's simple. But also, as you were talking, that the mentoring idea, it's that perception of Obi-Wan Kenobi or somebody mythical when you're going to them. But it's actually not that. It's not this ever knowing person. It's just a person that has spent a good bit of time, has been in a potential position that you've been in before or that you're going to be in, and they're dropping in their advice on that. Thank you. That was that brilliant. I want to look at the core source code of who you are and what you do. What are the core principles that guide you?
Yeah, so I'm not perfect. I go to a non-denominational church, Christian church, with my family. It's a socially, value-wise in our town that works for us. I do realize that I've traveled the entire country in an RV, and we've gone to many different churches, and the word Christian, or whatever the words are, Catholic, it is going to be vastly different meaning, whatever, depending on what group of people you're around. So I abstract out some basic principles, and the things I like about my current community is that the general theme is that, we're not perfect, but we're trying to do the next right thing. And so when I am approached with a situation, I will ask myself, what is the right thing to do? And I almost always hate the answer, but I do that thing anyways. So most of the time when you ask yourself what the right thing to do is, the logic might not add up, and you might, like, let's say if you're a business person, you might have a contract loophole that you could use, but you know that the sentiment between you and the other person was different. And so what you want to do is you want to do the next right thing. And I don't get it right all the time, to be honest with you. So I get it right. I've been getting it right more as I've gotten older. But if you try to be perfect, that's a recipe for disaster. You're going to try to end up screwing around with the past, trying to make everything right. That you get anxiety. It's, did I make the right move? Am I wearing the right clothes today? Like, it's a recipe for disaster. But when somebody told me that, when I heard, just focus on doing the next right thing, I thought, okay, well, let's try that. And I've held on to that for, I think, about 3 years now. It's been pretty effective in my life.
Wow.
So that's what I try to do.
I love that. It's like a motivator as well, and experimental too.
Yeah. And I have, I guess since we're being real, there was a thing that happened within the past year in our family household where I had where I chose to do the right thing, and it cost me about $270,000. And that was a hard decision to make. Yeah. I started thinking about it. I was like, I'd rather keep that money, put it towards kids' future or whatever it is. And I was like, yeah, but that's just not the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I sat with my wife and I was like, hey, here's kind of our options. And, we prayed about it and thought about it a lot. And we're just like, look, legally I can do it. Legally I'm fine. Legally everything's good to go. But it's not the right thing to do. And we were like, damn it. All right, fine. And I was like, all right, good. Because like I have to face myself in the mirror. I can't go around telling people that my aim is to do the next right thing and to have, handshake deals on sentiment and like follow truth if I'm not going to do that. So that was the time I was tested and had the greatest financial impact on me. And I cannot express how much I would not have done that in my 20s.
Wow. Wow. It's, you mentioned earlier, anchors. And I'm wondering, is that one of your anchors? So when something like that happens and you stand by that decision and you have those conversations, you stand by that as being an anchor that you put out, and you can be, it's a big number, but you can be anchored in that decision. Yeah,
I just try to do the next right thing. That's probably, if you're asking the source code, that's what it reads. Try to do the next right thing. You may fail, but get up tomorrow and try to do the next right thing.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you one final question. Looking to the future, the visionary that you are, what is one piece of advice that you'd like to give to your future self?
Well, that's a good question. Future Joel. I think a lot about future Joel. Usually on like a day to week basis, like what's tomorrow Joel going to think about this? Right. So I think about that quite a bit. I found that my future self is pretty smart because I'm always looking back on myself being like, what an idiot. Like if I look back at myself 5 years ago, I was like, that dude's a moron. 10 years ago, really stupid. And so what I've learned is that my future self is much smarter than I currently am. I think that what he would say to me would be, yeah, you're an idiot, but you never gave up. I think that's like recurring advice in my life. I was like, dude, that 5 years ago Joel was stupid, but he kept going and he's got better. And he's not perfect today, but he's better than he was yesterday. Yeah.
I love that. And, future you're going to have humanoids doing your laundry. Yeah. That's something to look forward to.
My wife's very excited about it. I told her, I was like, the only thing worse than doing the laundry is listening to you talk about doing the laundry. She's funny. She understands. We've been together a long time. She laughed her face off. So, like laundry is a chore and technology serves to improve our lives. Elon Musk has shown Optimus Bot folding laundry. If Boston Dynamics has a dog that can do backflips and kill people, why don't we just make it do some laundry first?
Just please get the dogs to do our tasks instead of backflips, even though they are quite great to watch.
They are pretty great. Have you seen the synchronized dancing too? It's kind of phenomenal.
No, but that's what I'm going to do after this. I'm going to watch that.
They get the dog and then the Atlas robots, the standing, and they have them do synchronized choreographed dancing to like funny 80s music.
Doing better than I'll ever do. If there's any final words you'd like to say, please do now. If not, final things I would tell my past self. My favorite quote that changed my entire life at a very pivotal moment was a guy named Jim Rohn, who said, "For things to change, you've got to change." And that hits hard. Because when you imagine changing things, you imagine changing everything outside of yourself. But if you want things to change, you've got to change. And the second thing that I heard, not from Jim Rohn, but from another guy who was pretty cool, he had said, he had said, some people can stay excited for a few weeks. Some people can stay excited for a few months or even years. But winners stay excited for however long it takes. And I was like, that's it. You just got to stay excited for how long? Am I going to give it 6 months? Am I going to give it 2 years? How long am I going to commit to this business before I call it quits? 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And so when I started my show, I had heard these things. And when I started my show, I said, I am committing. And I told my wife, I said, we're committing
that I will do a podcast until the day I die, no matter what. Like, I'm going to be on my deathbed, and my measure of success is not listeners, followers, downloads, or money. My measure of success is, did I continue to do this, whether I had success or not, until I died? And within 2 years, it was my full-time job.
Where do you, I don't know if this is too broad a question, but where do you get this discipline from? Or where is this drive coming from?
You know, I don't know. The earliest memory I have of this is I was probably 8, and I have an older brother, and him and his friends were like slapping me around and beating me up, as we do on Friday nights, you know. And he had this other friend over, this like new friend who was like especially rough, and he kept pushing me down. I was smaller because they're my older brother and his friends. And I just remember that I just kept standing back up. Like, he'd push me down and stand back up. He'd push me down, stand back up. He'd sit on me, like, you know, and he was like, stay down. And I was like, no. And I just laughed, and I got back up, and it hurt so bad. But I was like, as long as I can physically get back up, I'm going to get back up. And what I noticed was, on like the last time, his face just switched and flipped. And he's like, dude, you are the coolest little guy I've ever seen in my entire life. He's like, this is unbelievable. He's like, I'm beating the crap out of you, and you're laughing, and you're standing up, and you're smiling, and you're asking for another. And then that just turned into all this respect. And I was like, oh my gosh, if you push through all the pain and you just never stop getting back up, eventually people are going to respect you. And so I just said, all right. You know, and I don't think I realized that at that point. I think that lesson taught me that, and I had a realization of it later. You know, obviously I was like 8 years old or whatever it was. But when I look back in my mind and I think to the times, like, what made me like this, was it my parents and how they raised me? I think about that as my earliest moment of like never giving up. And so, you know, from that, fast forward to 13, I get hit by a car. I'm in a wheelchair for a year. I have to go through the process of learning how to walk again. That reinforced it, right? Then in my early 20s, losing my mom, just keep going. That like reinforced it farther. And so there's these 2 or 3, 4 moments over the course of my 36, 7 years, whatever it is, that I can look back on and be like, that was a time where there was a fork in the road, and I chose the difficult path, and I went through it where I could have just crumbled and spent the rest of my days working at Walmart crying to a therapist, you know, whatever it was. There's so many people that give up, by the way, that like give up on life. And so I was like, yeah, you just, there's no other option. You just keep going. You just keep moving forward.
I'm really sorry to hear, firstly, just you losing your mom and that accident that happened. Yeah. What I can't fathom is just this incredible moment that not many people have. As you say, years later, not many people have that switch of, it's almost like, you know, the giving treats to a dog to get it to know not to pee on the floor in a certain space. It's almost like that moment was that thing that was like, yeah, you get a reward when you don't give up, and great things are behind that. You get a reward when you don't pee on a mat.
Yeah.
Did that come back to you then when your accident happened? Did that moment come back to you then, or are you looking back at it all now at a later stage being like, oh, that was it?
Yeah, probably a couple years ago is when actually when people started asking me in my personal life. That's actually because I've gotten that question. I got that question several times, and I was like, I don't know. I'm just this way. This is just who I am. And then I started like thinking about it, and I was like, oh, okay, there's these key moments in my life. And, you know, I've done interviews where people are like fascinated by that. And I was like, I don't know. You really have 2 options, give up or not give up. It's like, and giving up is really sad.
It is.
It's sad.
It is. But sometimes, you know what, but like sometimes day to day, it's just there. Like, people could be
Yeah.
giving up every single day and not realizing that they're doing it. You know, a small thing that you want to take up, a small habit that you want to start doing, you decide not to do it today. I'll do it tomorrow. You decide not to do it tomorrow. Those are small ways that people give up every single day. So sometimes it isn't in that situation where you have this brilliant, well, I guess you do have a choice, but it takes such a while to, it takes a long time to program your mind into being like, oh, this will bring you a treat.
Yeah, there's only one way to do it. It's very simple. There's a book about doing hard things. It's very popular. I forget what it's called, but it's something about doing hard things. But that's how you do it. That's how, if this were a muscle, if this were a physical attribute, go do very difficult things, and then get back up and continue doing difficult things, and you'll learn a lot, and you'll start to build trust with yourself. When you can look at yourself and be like, I know that this cannot work out, and I can be in the depth of whatever this trench may be, and I know that I'll find a way out. I know that I'll figure it out. Because here's the thing. Back to my comment earlier. You die. Like, that's it, you know? So, you know, why not, if you think yourself sucks right now, and I want to make sure I say this the right way, but like, kill that version of yourself. Like, if you don't trust yourself and you don't follow through on things, just be like, today's the day that person dies and a new person's born. Just today's my day, and just go for it, right? So that's been very, very useful for me. There was a huge part of my life where I was very much not great, and then I was like, I'm getting really bad results. Like, like, life is really junky. And then I started looking for answers, and one of the areas that I found, I would love to say I found a bunch in religion, but I didn't. But one of the areas where I did find a bunch of answers was personal development. An industry of you making yourself a better person. And that's when I found that for things to change, you've got to change. And that's when I found about the winners do it however long it takes. And then, you know, you just decide to believe that, and then you act and operate yourself in the world with that belief, and then you look back to see if it served you, right? So I take a belief, I hear somebody successful say something that seems like it's working, it's what I need. I take that belief, I adopt it, I trial it, I see if it's useful, and if it is, I keep it. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not.
It's like building your own Transformers suit of armor.
Yeah, I'm custom programming my own LLM. It's called Joel 2.0. Yep.
With that, thank you so much. It was great to speak to you. Thank you for your time. Thanks for using that precious time with us, and we look forward to tuning into your podcast and to seeing more of the work that you're doing.